Previously on Council of Geeks.
Sorry that this is depressing. And like I said, next weekend's video's not going to be any lighter. It's also not something I ever wanted to talk about again, but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it.
And now on Council of Geeks. I warned you. You know, I really need to stop claiming that I'm done talking about a thing. Because, I've never said that and not meant it. I always mean it when I say I want to be done talking about this. And I usually have in my mind a way in which I won't have to talk about that again. But people keep finding new ways to get worse. Ways I did not anticipate. Ways that in some cases I explicitly said, I don't think they're going to do that. I need to expand my imagination when it comes to just how awful the worst of us can be. On that note, let's talk about Neil Gaiman. I have talked way too damn much about this fucking guy. And yeah, I used to really love his work. He was one of my favorite writers. So this has hurt for a multitude of reasons, but I'm not going to recap everything. I have spent so much time already doing it. I will put a link down in a pinned comment to what are we up to now? 4 videos I've done on this frickin' man. Well, the reason I thought I wasn't going to have to talk about him again was, well, first of all, I already stated my intention to never talk about any of his works or anything that is derivative of his works, which reminder means I'm not going to be talking about the second Sandman, and I'm not going to be talking about the final movie or whatever it is of Good Omens. I understand he's not directly involved with that, and Terry Pratchett's estate has basically gone hands-on. That's great. That's wonderful. I'm still not going to talk about it. I still feel gross about that right now. So I have no intention of talking about any of that stuff. And so I thought, yeah, we'll probably find out more bad stuff about him, but I won't have to talk about it because it'll just be more allegations. Reminder, the allegations against him are pretty much all sexual in nature and range from him disregarding consent, failing to get proper consent, failing to take note of the power imbalance in situations that he was in, and in some cases, basically sexual assault and rape. So, yeah, wonderful spectrum of behavior that he has been denying, but we are up to, at my last count, 9 different women who have accused him, and they have stories that are consistent with each other, and it is spread across decades worth of time. So he's been doing this for a while. But the reason I thought I wasn't going to have to talk about him again, because I was like, there'll be more allegations. There'll be more women coming forward. It'll be more along the same lines, even if it's worse, and it's already pretty bad. But yes, I did know in my head, it could get worse in terms of what we find out specifically about him. But I thought I still don't have to talk about it because it's not going to alter my ultimate conclusion of, well, to hell with this guy. So I didn't think I'd have to talk about it, but then he did something that I actually said in a previous video I didn't think he was gonna do. So Neil Gaiman is currently suing one of his alleged victims, Caroline Wallner, for $500,000. Now, lest you think that this is a case of he's suing someone for defamation or slander or in any other way accusing her of lying, which is something that he and his legal team have somewhat done, in terms of their responses to this, always, saying this has never happened. We didn't, he didn't do that. He's never done anything like that. But they have kind of drawn the line explicitly calling anybody a liar or saying that they 100% made it up. They've been fairly careful about that for the most part. But this lawsuit is not anything about we think she lied. It's about breaking an NDA, which is why I thought he wouldn't do it. And the reason, and like to explain, first of all, okay, let's back up. NDAs have come up in the story of Neil Gaiman a few times. They came up initially in the first person to come forward, who was Scarlett. We'll get back to her. There's some other stuff going on there, but stick a pin in it. But Scarlett had to sign some NDAs. And when I talked about that in the very first video I did in all this, I noted that the kind of NDA she had to sign, which was basically an excessively broad, overreaching NDA, is a kind of NDA that is effectively unenforceable. Like when you have somebody sign something that basically says, I can't tell anybody ever anything that happened, even if it was criminal or abusive towards me. And it's like written in such broad terms that it basically means you can never talk ever. Those are pretty much never enforceable. You still see them in use because they are there as a scare tactic to keep people quiet. Part of what was real suspicious about Scarlett's was she was, as a reminder, the nanny for Gaiman and Amanda Palmer's kids, but she didn't sign an NDA until after she was no longer the nanny and like everything had happened between her and him. And that's another thing with Gaiman. He pretty much never denies that these relationships happen. He just denies that they were in any way non-consensual or coercive. So after everything fell apart between her and Gaiman, then she was given a retroactively dated NDA. Now, that is not quite what we're dealing with when talking about Caroline Wallner, because Caroline Wallner's NDA wasn't a broad, overreaching, too vague to be enforceable thing. It was actually real specific, which is probably why it has a better chance at holding up in court than something like the one Scarlett signed was, which is probably part of why Gaiman is going after Wallner and not Scarlett. Now, at this point, Scarlett's last name is public knowledge, but I'm not going to add it into things just because I don't want to. Like Caroline Wallner, I'll say her last name because from the very first time she came forward, she gave her first and last name. I even noted at the time that it kind of really spoke to the strength of her conviction and what she was saying, that she was willing to put her first and last name out there. Again, Scarlett's last name is in the public record now, but I still don't really feel comfortable expressing it, given that her initial coming forward, she didn't want to give it. I don't know. Like maybe I'm being overly cautious on that, but just work with me here. This whole thing just feels gross. So in the case of Wallner, her NDA was much more tailored and much more specific. Now, a reminder of what that situation was. So, long story as short as I can reasonably make it, and as short as my ADHD, tangent-loving, addled brain will allow me to make it. So, Wallner and her, I think, now ex-husband, at the very least, they were apart for a while. I don't know what their current status is or if they actually got a divorce, but Wallner and her husband were given a 5-acre plot of land on a much larger piece of land that Gaiman and Palmer owned. And they had a house, and the Wallners had a house there. And they were basically there as caretakers because this was in upstate New York where Gaiman was teaching at Bard College, but he's often away at book tours. Palmer was often touring for her music, so frequently the house would be empty. So that's why they had other people living on the property to serve as caretakers. Now, eventually, Wallner's husband left, they split, and Wallner was very concerned about her ability to, pay for her things and was very concerned about the state of the house. And basically, Gaiman, from her version of events, which I do believe, but, trying to frame things in the correct terminology, according to her, Gaiman began a sexual relationship with her, which he does not deny, though he claims she started it, and would put pressure on her around the idea of them taking the house back when she would say, I think maybe I want to stop doing this, or things along those lines. Now, eventually, she was put in a position where she was told she would have to vacate the property. And during discussions with Gaiman's lawyer, at some point in some way in those discussions, she brought up what had gone on between her and Gaiman. Now, as I said in the video where I talked about this, It's unclear whether she actually brought it up as a leverage point in negotiations or if it was just something she mentioned because she was just trying to get more time to get a new place to not end up without a home. And maybe she was just listing stuff that was causing her stress and, stuff that had gone on with Gaiman would have added to that. And maybe the lawyer realized what a problem that was and decided to jump on that. Like, okay, yeah, we gotta NDA the hell out of this. So negotiations then did happen. She was paid. She was paid $250,000 to sign a very tight, but also very specific and explicit NDA. So unlike the one that Scarlett signed, which was overly broad and pretty much unenforceable in most courts, this one was far more specific to a certain set of things, and it also included something that she was getting in return. She got the money for signing the NDA, which makes the whole thing a contract that is far more enforceable, and Gaiman is now suing her for breach of that contract. Now, you might have noticed a discrepancy in funds because she was paid $250,000. He's suing her for $500,000. The way they came up with that number is he is suing her for the return of the $250,000, suing for his attorney's fees, and basically trying to penalize her $50,000 for every outlet that she spoke to. So that's where he came up with that number. Why did I think he wouldn't do this? Well, couple of reasons. First of all, keep in mind that back when Wallner's story broke, we didn't yet have the reporting from, I believe it was Vulture. Yes, it was Vulture. Because actually the first write-up I read about this was from the same journalist. So yeah, the write-up in Vulture, which was something that I've been waiting for a while, because the initial story was broken by Tortoise Media, who I have a whole lot of problems with the way that they covered this story. I don't disbelieve any of their reporting, and I don't think they reported anything that was a falsehood, or at least knowingly so. I just think they're a really sleazy organization, and they undermine these women's stories with the way that they presented this stuff. But again, I've talked way too much about that, so we're going to move on. But in any case, at the time that I said, I don't think he's going to try and come after her for talking to Tortoise Media about this, the Vulture story hadn't broken, which pretty much appeared to be the real nail in the coffin for a lot of people. I'd already written him off, but I made what was supposed to be my final video after the Vulture story, because that is an outlet I trust a hell of a lot more than Tortoise Media, and also so do most people, apparently. I think a lot of folks looked at Tortoise and the way they approached it, and the fact that they did it as podcasts, and the fact that they kept putting out new episodes, oftentimes just regurgitating what stuff was learned elsewhere, or finding people who had already been found by other podcasts or whatnot, bringing them in so that they could put out another podcast, which were all running ads. The whole thing just came across as kind of skeezy, and it is from an outlet that is not particularly well known outside of the UK. I don't know what its reputation is in the UK. I get mixed information about that, but it seemed to be one that enough people had doubts about, that there were some holding on to some degree of hope. The Vulture article kind of blew all that up. But anyway, the reason I bring all that up is because when I said I don't think he's going to come after her for breaking the NDA is because of the Streisand effect. It would just bring more attention to it. Of course, after the Vulture article came out, well, plenty of attention is already on this now. What does he have to lose? Which actually also appears to be the sentiment of Wallner's own lawyer, who was also surprised that he went after her for this. Because the thing is, regardless of what the legal reality is, the general public perception is going to be, if you sue someone for breaking an NDA, you're kind of confirming that they told something that did happen that you didn't want them to. Because again, he's not suing her for defamation. If he was going after any of these people for defamation, it would still be a bullying tactic, but that would be something he could theoretically go after all these women for if he's claiming that what they are saying is untrue. But he's not. He is going after the one who signed a very specific and probably actually enforceable NDA, and he is just trying to claw money back that, unless he has completely botched his finances, he doesn't need. So he's just being cruel and petty. And the thing is, at the time that I said I don't think he'll do this, I think he still cared about his reputation. And he still thought maybe if he could lay low, this would blow over. Now, I think he knows it won't. So I don't think he cares that everyone is going to clearly see this is him being the bad guy, this is him being the bully. Because it just is. This is a man of wealth and means suing somebody for double what he gave them. Now, again, if you are of the opinion that violating the NDA means that she should have to at least give back the money, I don't personally feel that. But even if you do feel that, you still have to admit the optics are real bad for him. There is no way he looks like anything other than petty and vengeful. But he doesn't seem to care anymore that that's what this looks like. So I also mentioned Scarlett. So in looking into this, I also found out something that I'd missed before. And even if I caught it before, I probably wouldn't have dedicated a video strictly to this because it's not really new allegations. It's just an escalation of existing ones. However, since I'm stuck talking about this guy already, sure, let's throw it in as a whatever the opposite of a treat is. So, Scarlett. Again, reminder, this is the nanny. This was the very first person to come forward. Back in February, she filed a civil lawsuit against both Gaiman and Amanda Palmer. She is suing Gaiman for rape and Palmer for human trafficking for, according to Scarlett, enabling and knowing what Gaiman was doing. So that is quite an escalation because if you either don't remember or don't want to go back and rewatch those things, because I don't blame you, they're depressing, she did go to the police in New Zealand where all of this happened. However, it really didn't seem like it was ever going to move forward there. And I am not one to defend the cops in any country, but ultimately I did understand why, because her case was probably the messiest, certainly from the idea of pursuing legal action, because there was a whole bunch of archived WhatsApp and email messages, etc., that while not completely disproving her version of events, which was that he was coercive and physically forceful and disregarded her consent, and well, I mean, now she's saying actually raped her, that's the current wording in the lawsuit, there was that which the WhatsApp messages don't make impossible, but Gaiman's version of events was this was consensual at every step. And the WhatsApp messages and voicemails lean more in the direction of his interpretation. Now, that's not to say that she's lying and he's not. It just means that if you were dealing with the weight of evidence in a court, it is at best going to be kind of messy. And it would make for a very, very difficult prosecution to try and prove beyond a reasonable doubt, because the WhatsApp would introduce what would be, to most people, pretty reasonable doubts as to the certainty. But, of course, civil cases do not have the same statute of proof. They don't have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in order to go in a plaintiff's favor, at least not in the U.S. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's the U.S., but this is in New Zealand, right? Well, no. Oddly, and I'm not entirely sure why, but for some reason, Scarlett actually filed her civil suit in the States rather than in New Zealand. Now, I don't know enough or indeed anything about New Zealand law, so I don't know if this is a case of there isn't really an equivalent of being able to file that kind of civil suit in New Zealand, and that's why she's doing it in the U.S., where I believe at the very least Palmer has residency, if not Gaiman. I think he has dual citizenship. I think he has multiple citizenships. But regardless, given that it happened in New Zealand, you'd think it would go there, and I don't really know the legal strategy reason why it isn't. That is the basis on which Gaiman's currently trying to get it dismissed. And not knowing, me not knowing, not the rationale for why this case was filed in a country where it didn't happen and the plaintiff doesn't live, and I don't even know if it's currently where the defendants live. Yeah, it might get dismissed on that basis. But I thought it was worth noting that Scarlett clearly feels passionately enough about this. And once she realized that the police were not going to move forward, which again, through the lens of, are we actually going to get a conviction if we try and move this forward and prosecute? I get why it isn't. I'm not saying that's right, but I get it. I guess with that knowledge in her head, she said, well, I'm going to do something. She already kind of broke the dam open, being the first one to come forward, but I think she wants recompense. She wants justice for what happened to her specifically. Like, I don't doubt that it is, well, I would hope at least that it is some kind of comfort for her that it has helped give voice to other people as well, so more people can know, and he can, amongst other things, not ever get away with doing this again. But of course, stopping somebody from doing more bad in the future doesn't fix, correct, amend, or compensate for whatever bad they've done in the past. And she seems to be seeking justice in whatever way she can. And again, I don't know how that's going to pan out. I don't know enough about the legal system in this country, much less what would happen if it gets dismissed and she has to try and file in New Zealand. I have no clue what would happen in that case. But yeah, the fact that courts are now getting involved, but not for the purposes of prosecuting Gaiman, was kind of unexpected to me. And again, the thing about the Wallner thing with him suing her over that. Oh, and it's also worth mentioning, Wallner was already suing him. Hey, it's Vera from The Edit. Minor correction to my wording here. Wallner didn't, strictly speaking, sue Gaiman. What she did was she filed a claim for arbitration over what she claims is him breaking his side of the NDA. And I'll get into specifics in that in just a minute, but just be aware that if I continue to say the word sue, that's not the right term, and I don't know enough about the law to really parse the exact difference, but I just wanted to be sure I got that right and amended it. So, back to me. She actually filed a claim for arbitration first for breach of the NDA, because this was kind of an interesting detail. There were specific things he had to do according to the NDA, as well as her. Like, she had a whole list of things that she wasn't allowed to talk about or whatever, and she does appear to have broken that by speaking to the press. But there was also an agreement to delete any relevant messages, videos, pictures, etc. But that wasn't something that only she was supposed to do. Gaiman was supposed to do that too. So while under some other circumstances I might think, oh, you're making someone delete the supporting evidence that proves of the, what it was that you did. In this case, he was supposed to delete it too. So at least on paper, what it looks like was supposed to happen was, look, we're just going to wipe the site clean so nobody has leverage over anybody. He won't have any, pictures or text or whatever that makes it look like everything was consensual. You won't have anything that you could present that makes it look like it wasn't. Basically kind of avoiding the Scarlett situation where here's all this stuff and maybe it leans this way, maybe it leans that way, depending on how it's looked at. The agreement was it's just gone. Nobody gets to use it, which for what the situation was, doesn't strike me as completely unreasonable. But it becomes unreasonable if it is in fact true that Gaiman and his side didn't delete stuff. If they kept video, if they kept pictures, if they kept recordings of voice or video call, or if they kept text messages and emails that they weren't supposed to have, and in fact explicitly signed a document saying that they would get rid of. So the funny thing is Wallner was already filing a claim for arbitration, which I guess the tiniest sliver of grace that I could give is one could consider what Gaiman is currently doing countersuing, except that, again, he, financially at least, he holds all the cards. Like, he can outspend her, and he can afford to pay the fines. He just can. So it still does not change my view that his deciding to file suit for her to claw back his money plus punitive, like, that's the other thing. If it was just trying to claw back the $250, still a dick move, but by the strictest definitions of the NDA and the agreement under which she got paid, okay, she did break the NDA. If you want to claw that back, you do have a right to do so. Strictly talking within the definitions of that agreement. Now, completely separate conversation as to whether that NDA situation ever should have happened in the first place and whether the NDA was ethical in terms of its wording and its restrictions. That's another conversation. But if we take it as an existing document, whether we like it or not, and we take it as a valid legal document, which, again, I can't say for a certainty, but it certainly seems like it's a lot more valid and enforceable than the one Scarlett had to sign, then yeah, she did break it. And yeah, normally you'd think, well, you were given money to either do or not do a thing, and you broke that agreement, you give the money back. It would still be a dick move on his part because it would still appear petty, but what brings it to the level of spiteful and cruel is that he wants punitive damages. The man doesn't care anymore. He is continuing to deny this, but clearly seems to understand that he has lost in the court of public opinion. He has lost whatever grace the vast majority of people who once adored him and his work were ever going to give him. So at this point, what does he have to lose by being petty and by being cruel? I never would have defended the guy, but I would have at least admitted a defense could be mounted if he was only going after the 250, especially after Wallner filed a claim for arbitration first. But he's not. He wants to hurt her. And that is very much in keeping with the image that is becoming clear about this man. That's what he does. He hurts people. And he seems to take some degree of enjoyment out of doing that. I guess ultimately why I needed to talk about this was just from my own surprise of him doing everything short of just going, yeah, I did it. What are you going to do about it? Like, he hasn't said that, to be clear. But he obviously, while continuing to deny it, which is probably just a legal position at this point, he does seem to not care if he is the bad guy anymore. I think the best that we can hope for is that he just crawls into a hole and does not emerge again. As for Palmer, I mean, they're getting a divorce. I think the filing for divorce was 2022, and she's certainly trying to distance herself from all of this. I think she should actually be more concerned about Scarlett's lawsuit than he is, because Scarlett's lawsuit is basically just backing up her story already, dragging Palmer into it and basically saying, yeah, she knew what was going on and enabled it, which, going by what was in the WhatsApps and what was told to both Scarlett and a friend of hers who were in communication with Palmer to varying degrees, it's certainly possible. I would say it's a valid interpretation of everything that had gone on. Am I going to say as confidently, yeah, she definitely knew and definitely enabled? No, I'm not. But I could believe it. I know almost nothing about Amanda Palmer. This has nothing to do with like the sense of betrayal that I have for Gaiman or anything else. This is just based off of what we know from that very first release of information relating to what happened to Scarlett, and, you know, with messages and everything else that went on with that. Yeah, what Scarlett is now saying is a believable interpretation of that evidence, you know, from my non-legal, not a lawyer perspective. But I don't know that for certainty. Gaiman is a piece of shit. And I will happily just say that. Because, God, man, it's somehow even more disheartening and mildly depressing when somebody who you think you couldn't disappoint me anymore still finds a way to do it. Because I didn't think I could be more disillusioned about him. But then he decided to be legally spiteful and financially petty. Like, oh, okay. Well, now you're just proving yourself to be a tiny, angry little boy on top of everything else. What frickin' fun. I'm not even going to bother saying I want this to be the last time I talk about Gaiman. It's always going to be I want this to be the last time I talk about Gaiman. But I don't know. The man could find some new, hitherto unimagined depth to sink to. I hope not, but I'm not going to put it past him. Just like I can't put anything past Rowling anymore. So, oh God, the fact that I had to talk about each of them within like a month time spent. If the world could stop descending into the abyss for just like a week, just so I can catch up and maybe get a massage or something, that'd be great. Or failing that, if there could stop being a national shortage on my ADHD meds and I could get that going again, it would help a lot. Because otherwise, this stuff just worms its way into my brain. And I'm stuck with it until I do something about it. So, sorry. Like I am. I am sorry that I'm still talking about this. I'm sorry that there's anything to talk about. And I'm sorry that it's all depressing. I'm sorry that I couldn't think of a fun gag to do with the whiteboard this time. But no, I've got nothing. I've got no jokes left. It just sucks. Neil Gaiman and all the whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe, they all help. What I really want you to remember, though, is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lopfula, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Blahuvian, Adam RDL Taylor, Pal Barabajoggle, Mary Mello, Mira G, Sir Didymus is my favorite. I've never screwed that one up before. Well, if you want to hear me mess up your name, check out the rewards on the Patreon. I'm going to blame you.